The $00 sat on the tip line like a slap. Nora Bell read it twice, because the first time her brain refused. 40 minutes of service. A bottle of wine that cost more than her rent share. A man who had eaten alone at the best table in the house, by the tall windows where the river caught the last copper of the summer evening, and who had signed the bill with a fountain pen, and then drawn one clean, deliberate zero where the gratuity went. She stood very still in the soft clatter of the dining room. Somewhere behind her, a cork came free with a sigh. The air smelled of seared butter and the white lilies on the host stand. And under that, faintly, of the river coming through the propped terrace doors, green and warm. Her thumb pressed the edge of the leather check folder until the nail went pale. "It's fine," she told herself. "The way you tell a burn, it's fine." It's fine. It was not fine. She had counted on that tip the way you count on a stair being there in the dark. The heron room glittered around her, all brass and low gold light. The kind of place where the water glasses were never empty and the staff were never seen. Outside, the long July dusk hung on, refusing to end, and the patio strings glowed over couples in linen. Inside, Nora Bell was 26 years old, 3 weeks behind, and holding a receipt that said a stranger thought her worth exactly nothing. She made herself look at the table he'd left. Table 9, cleared now except for the single glass he'd barely touched and the chair pushed in with care, as though he'd been raised never to leave a mess for anyone. She remembered him too well, which was the worst part. He'd come in at the slow hour, no reservation, and the host had nearly turned him away until he gave a name in a low voice, and something changed in the host's face like weather. Julian Hale. She hadn't known the name. She'd known the coat, charcoal, summer weight, too good for the season, the kind of quiet expensive that didn't shout. She'd known the watch when he turned his wrist. And she'd known, the moment she set down his water, that he was the loneliest-looking man she had ever waited on, and she had waited on a great many. "Good evening," she'd said. "Can I get you started with something while you look?" "Water is fine." A pause, like he'd run out of practice with sentences that weren't orders. "Thank you. Take your time. The river's the best thing on the menu, and it's free." He had looked up then. Grey eyes. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. For a half-second she'd thought he might almost smile. He hadn't. But he'd looked at her. Actually looked, not through, and said, "Is it always this loud in your head, or only at this table?" She'd laughed before she could stop herself. "Only the good tables, sir. You should hear me at the bad ones." That had been the whole of it. He'd ordered the trout because she'd told him the chef did it plain and right, and he'd eaten half, and he'd turned his ring, a worn signet on his smallest finger, around and around through the long quiet while the room filled and emptied. Twice she'd refilled his water. Once she'd cleared a plate and asked if he wanted anything sweet, and he'd said no in a voice that meant something else entirely, something closer to I've forgotten how. And then he'd left a zero. "Bell," the voice cut across the floor, clipped and oiled. "My office." Vincent Marsh stood at the kitchen pass with a clipboard he carried like a scepter. 45, Jim tightened, a smile that never reached above his teeth. He had managed the Heron Room for 6 years and ran it like a man who believed the staff were a cost to be minimized and the guests a wallet to be opened. 2 minutes, Vince. I've got table 12's dessert now." The office was a closet behind the wine cage, hot with the day's stored heat, smelling of cardboard and the lemon cleaner the dishwasher used too much of. Vince closed the door. On a normal night, the river breeze didn't reach back here, and tonight was not a normal night. "Frankly," he began. He always began with "frankly," as though the rest of his sentences were lies he was warning you about. "Frankly, I've had a complaint." Nora's stomach dropped. "From who?" "Table 9. She nearly laughed again, the wrong kind. "Table 9 left me nothing on a $400 check, and he complained?" He told the host on his way out that his server was, and I quote, "too familiar." Vince tapped the clipboard. We are not a roadside diner. Belle, we don't chat. We don't tell guests the river is free. These people pay for silence, and they pay for it well, and you cost me a regular tonight before he was even a regular. He spoke to me first. Frankly, I don't care if he proposed marriage. A thin smile. You're on probation, as of tonight. One more note in your file and we'll have a different conversation. Are we clear? Heat climbed her neck. She thought about the 0. She thought about the number on her phone that morning, the landlord's, the one she hadn't called back. She thought about her sister Posey, 15 and asleep on the fold-out in the apartment they shared since the spring, who needed new shoes for the summer program and didn't know how close the edge was. We're clear, she said. Good. Clean 9 and reset it. We've got a 9:30. She went back out into the gold light with her face arranged into nothing, which was a skill she'd earned. The dining room had thinned. The pianist was playing something soft and expensive. Out on the terrace a woman laughed, and the warm night took the sound and carried it over the water. Birdie was folding napkins at the service station, and Birdie had seen the whole thing the way Birdie saw everything, sideways, while appearing to do laundry. Let me guess, Birdie said, without looking up. She was 61, silver-rooted, and had been carrying trays through this town since before Vince was old enough to ruin a Saturday. Frankly, you're a disgrace, and the napkins fold themselves. Probation. For the river line. Birdie snorted. Honey, I've told tables the bread is free for 30 years. The day they fire me over a free roll, I'll fold myself into a swan and float off. She pressed a creased napkin flat with the heel of her hand. Don't let him get behind your eyes. That's where he lives if you let him. He says I cost him a regular. That man wasn't a regular. That man was a ghost who forgot to stay home. Birdie's gaze flicked toward the windows where the river had gone from copper to slate. I've seen rich and I've seen sad, and I've seen rich and sad, which is the worst of the three because they can afford to stay that way. He had all three on him like cologne. Nora picked up a bus tub and a clean cloth and went to reset table 9. Because the work didn't stop for feelings, the work never once in her life had stopped for feelings. The window held her reflection over the dark water. Apron, ponytail coming loose. The tired set of her own mouth. She wiped the table in long strokes. She squared the chairs. She reached for the leather check folder she'd dropped there to take the man's signed copy for the till. And that was when she saw it. She'd glanced at the bill in fury and seen only the 0. Now, under the warmed-down light, smoothing the merchant slip to file it, she saw the rest. Below the signed line, below that hateful round 0, there was a second mark. Tiny, made not with the fountain pen, but with the pencil from the folder, the little golf pencil guests used to mark wine flights. A row of numbers. Small and exact, pressed light into the paper, so you'd only catch them if the light came in low across the page. 10 digits. She stood with the slip an inch from her nose. Not a total, not a table number. 10 digits, grouped the way a person groups a phone number, and beneath them, smaller still, 3 words she had to tilt the paper to read. Not the 0. Her heart did something complicated. She looked up reflexively, half expecting him to be standing in the doorway watching, but the doorway held only the night, and the patio lights, and a busboy named Theo wrestling an umbrella shut against the warm breeze. Not the 0. She read it 4 times. The longer she looked, the less she understood, and the more she needed to. A man leaves you nothing in front of the whole room, and then hides a number where only the person who cleans up after him would ever find it. Where Vince would never see. Where the host would never see. Where you'd see it only if you were the kind of person who smoothed a slip flat instead of crumpling it in anger. It was a test. Some cold, strange test, run by a man who'd decided in 40 minutes that she was worth experimenting on. Or it was something else, and she didn't have a word for the something else yet. Nora, Theo had drifted close, sensing drama the way teenagers do. You good? You look like you saw the tip. I saw the tip. She closed the folder over the slip. Then, before she could think better of it, she opened it again and slid the merchant copy out and into her apron pocket, which was, technically, against 6 rules. The till copy and the guest copy stayed in the folder. The little pencil-marked slip went with her, warm against her hip, ridiculous, a secret she had no business keeping. Vince says you're on probation. Vince says a lot of things. He says the Trout guy was a big deal. Theo lowered his voice with relish. Carlos in the kitchen looked him up. Julian Hale. Like. Hale. Hale Maritime. Hale Tower. The building with the gold lobby downtown. Carlos says he's worth like. Theo made a number with his hands that meant nothing, because his hands couldn't hold that many zeros. Nora's mouth had gone dry. He's a billionaire. Carlos says when his father stepped back last year, the news called him the most private man in the city. Like, no interviews, no pictures, nothing. He doesn't even go to his own galas. Theo grinned. And he ate trout at table 9 and stiffed you. Classic rich. Classic rich, she echoed. But her hand had gone to her apron pocket, to the small flat shape of the slip, and her thumb found the edge of it the way her tongue would find a sore tooth. Not the 0. As though the 0 had been a thing he'd had to do. A thing performed for the room, for the host, for the version of himself the world expected. And the number was the thing underneath. The true thing. Slipped to her in pencil where no one looked. She did not believe that. She refused to believe that. Because believing things like that about men in good coats was how women like her ended up worse off than they started, and she had a sister and a fold-out couch and a landlord who didn't take feelings as payment. And yet she didn't throw it away. The rest of the shift moved on rails. The 9:30 came, a 6 top of investment people who ordered loudly and tipped like the math embarrassed them. The kitchen burned through the last of the trout. Vince stood at the pass and watched her with the patience of a man who'd already filled out half the paperwork in his head. The long, blue summer dusk finally let go of the sky, and the river turned to black glass, and the lilies on the host stand opened wider in the heat and pushed their scent through the whole front of the house. By 11 the floor was stripped, and the chairs were up, and the only light left was the work light over the service station, hard and white after a night of gold. Nora rolled silverware until her fingers ached. Birdie counted her bank with the speed of someone who'd never once been $1 short. "You're quiet," Birdie said. "Quieter than probation quiet. This is a different quiet. Long night." Birdie banded a stack of ones. "You want a ride? My car's the one that smells like the dog I don't have. I'll take the bus." "I like the bus." She didn't. She liked the $4. Suit yourself. Birdie shrugged into a cardigan, even though the night outside was still bath-warm. At the door she paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back at Nora with eyes that had read 1,000 bad nights off 1,000 faces. "Whatever's in your pocket," she said, burning a hole that size. "Sleep on it before you do anything. Things that find you at the end of a shift always look different in the morning. Usually smaller. Sometimes worse." Nora went very still. "There's nothing in my pocket." "Sure there isn't." Birdie's mouth twitched. "Good night, Swan." And then she was gone into the warm dark, and the door sighed shut, and Nora stood alone in the white light with 1,000 rolled forks and 1 folded slip, and a question she could not put down. She waited for the late bus on the bench outside, under a streetlight where moths threw themselves at the bulb in soft ticks. The night smelled of hot pavement cooling, of river, of somebody's jasmine spilling over a courtyard wall down the block. Across the street the Heron Room's gold sign went dark as the last cook left. Her phone said 11:48. Her bank app said a number she didn't open. Her apron, folded over her arm now, held the slip. She took it out. Under the streetlight the pencil digits were even harder to read. Ghost grey. Almost gone. She had to angle the paper until the light slid across it. Not the 0. And the number. A normal person threw it away. A smart person, a person with a sister and a probation and a landlord, burned it. A man worth more money than God did not write his number in pencil on a waitress's slip for any reason a waitress would survive. Every story Nora had ever been told by every tired woman she'd ever worked beside ended the same way when the rich man left a number. She knew all of that. She typed the digits into her phone anyway, just to hold them, just to make them real, her thumbs moving before her better judgment could file a complaint. She did not press call. She would not press call. She would look at the number and prove to herself it was nothing, and then she would put her phone away and ride the bus home and never think about Julian Hale again. The bus came, hissing to the curb in a wash of warm diesel and yellow light. The doors folded open. The driver waited, and the engine idled, and the moths ticked against the street lamp, and Nora Bell sat on the bench with her thumb hovering over a number she had no business owning. And she felt, under the fear, under the anger, under the good sense of every woman who'd warned her, one small, traitorous thread of something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Curiosity, the dangerous kind, the kind that doesn't ask whether you can afford it. You getting on, or not? The driver called. She looked at the open doors. She looked at the phone, not the 0. Sorry, she said, and stood, and the slip nearly slid from her fingers in the warm wind off the river before she caught it against her chest. Sorry, yeah, I'm coming. She climbed up into the empty bus and took a seat by the window and watched the dark town slide by. And the whole way home the phone sat face up on her knee with 10 digits glowing on the screen, waiting for a decision she had already half made and was not yet brave enough to admit. The apartment was 3 flights up over a laundromat, and even at midnight, the stairwell held the warm cotton and detergent smell of the machines that ran till 1. Posey had left the lamp on. She was asleep on the fold-out with a library book tented on her chest, her summer program folder on the floor where it had slid, and the box fan turning its slow head back and forth over both of them, pushing the heat around without ever quite moving it. Nora stood in the doorway and looked at her sister and felt the whole weight of the day settle where it always settled, low and certain, between her shoulders. She set her keys down quietly. She filled a glass at the tap and drank it standing at the counter in the dark, the water tasting of summer pipes, warm and a little metallic. Through the open window the city ticked and hummed, a siren somewhere far off, a neighbor's music, the laundromat's dryers tumbling their endless soft thunder below. She took out the slip one more time and flattened it on the counter under the stove light. Not the 0. What does that even mean? She whispered to the empty kitchen. Her phone still held the number. She picked it up. It was past midnight now, which made the whole idea insane. You didn't call a billionaire at midnight. You didn't call a billionaire at all. You certainly didn't call the man who'd gotten you put on probation and left you nothing and turned your night into a riddle you couldn't stop turning over. She wasn't going to call. She was going to do the smart thing. She opened a new message instead, because a message felt smaller, deniable, a thing you could send into the dark and pretend you hadn't. She typed, and deleted, and typed again, her sister breathing slow across the room, the fan ticking at the end of each turn. You left a 0 in front of the whole room, she wrote. Then you left this where only I'd find it. I don't know what game this is, but I clean up after men like you for a living. So I'll ask plainly, what is the number for? Her thumb hovered. Outside, the dryers rumbled. The stove light buzzed faintly over the slip and its ghost grey digits, not the 0, and the round, insulting 0 from the bill seemed very far away now, like a thing he'd done for an audience that had already gone home. Don't, said every sensible voice she owned. She pressed send. The message went out into the warm midnight with a soft electric whisper, and for one long second Nora felt nothing but the clean relief of having finally done something, and then the second ended, and the fear arrived, enormous and immediate, because the little grey bubble had changed. Delivered. And then, while she stood frozen at the counter, with her heart going like the dryers below, at 12 minutes past midnight, from the most private man in the city, the man who didn't do interviews or photographs or his own galas, 3 dots appeared. He was typing back. The dots pulsed once, twice, and stopped. Nora held her breath against the counter, the stove light buzzing over the slip, and watched the grey bubbles vanish as though they'd never existed. Below, the dryers turned. The fan ticked at the end of its arc and started back. Across the room, Posey stirred, murmured something to a dream, and went still again. Nothing came. A minute passed. Then 2. She set the phone face down, then turned it over, then set it down again, hating herself for the small choreography of a woman waiting. This is what you get, she thought. You send a message into the dark, and the dark just keeps it. She'd embarrassed herself in absolute privacy, which was the only mercy left. She filled the glass again and drank it warm. She was reaching to turn off the stove light when the phone lit the ceiling. 3 words. No greeting. For the number. Nora read it standing very still, and her pulse did the complicated thing again. For the number. It answered her question with her own words, neat as a man returning a coat to the exact peg you'd hung it on. She typed back fast, before nerve could leave her. That's not an answer. That's a circle. The reply came quicker this time. You found it. Most people would have crumpled the slip. You smoothed it flat. I wanted to know which kind of person you were before I said anything at all. Her face went hot. So it was a test. She thumbed the words hard into the screen. You left me nothing in front of my whole floor, got me put on probation, and called it research. Do you know what a 0 on that line does to someone like me? Of course you don't. You've never once looked at a tip line in your life. The dots came and stayed a long time. She imagined him somewhere across the dark river city, a glass tower, a gold lobby, a room with too much air in it, turning his ring around and around. When the message landed, it was longer than the others. You're right. I don't read tip lines. I read rooms. Your manager was watching us the entire meal, and the moment I tipped well, he'd have decided you'd earned it by being, his word, not mine, familiar. You'd have lost the floor section that pays. I have watched men like him punish kindness for sport. So I left the 0 where he could see it, and the number where he couldn't. And I never said a word against you to anyone. Whatever complaint your manager claims I made to the host, I didn't make it. A man like him doesn't need a true reason to put you on probation, only a usable one. I am sorry it cost you tonight. I did not think it would cost you so fast. Nora sat down slowly on the kitchen chair with the wobbly leg. The fan moved the warm air across her arms. She read it twice. It was either the truest thing anyone had said to her in months, or the most expensive lie she'd ever been handed. And the terrible part, the part that kept her thumb hovering, was that it knew Vince. It knew exactly the shape of Vince, a man it had watched for 40 minutes across a plate of plain trout. You don't know me, she wrote. You watched me carry water for 40 minutes. I watched you tell a sad stranger the river was free, he wrote back. That's a great deal of information, if you're paying attention. Most people stopped paying me any attention years ago. I notice when someone starts again. She didn't answer that. She couldn't. Not honestly. Not at midnight, with her sister breathing across the room, and a number glowing in her hand like a coal she should have dropped. She typed "Good night, Mr. Hale," and turned the phone face down for good, and sat in the dark kitchen with her heart going, and the dryers rumbling their soft, endless thunder 3 floors below, and did not feel, the way she'd promised herself she would, like a woman who had just proven it, was nothing. She felt like a woman standing at the top of a stair in the dark, foot already lifted, trusting the next step to be there. Morning came hot and white through the laundromat windows, the stairwell already thick with detergent, and the day's first wash. Nora made eggs while Posey sat cross-legged on the fold-out sorting the summer program folder into piles that meant something only to a 15-year-old. "There's a deposit," Posey said, not looking up. "For the field trips. It's due Friday." She said it the careful way she said all the things that cost money. Light, like setting a glass on a wet table. "It's fine if we can't. I can stay back with the little kids group. They do crafts. You're not doing crafts." Nora slid the eggs onto the chipped plate. "You're doing the river ecology one. You've talked about it since May. It's $40. I know what it is." She did. She knew it to the dollar. The way she knew every number that mattered, and none of the ones that didn't. The window over the sink was open, and the morning smelled of hot brick and someone frying onions downstairs, and under it, faint and green, the river 2 blocks east. "Friday. You'll have it Friday." "Eat." Posey looked at her with their mother's eyes, too knowing for the freckled face around them. "You got the bad table again last night. I can tell. You do the thing with your shoulders. I do not do a thing with my shoulders. You're doing it now." Nora dropped her shoulders, and Posey grinned, and for a moment the kitchen was just warm and small and theirs. The box fan turning its head, the eggs steaming, the whole impossible city held outside the window where it belonged. Then the phone buzzed on the counter, and Nora's stomach turned over before she even saw the screen, because some animal part of her already knew, not him. A number she did know, saved under one cold word, landlord. Nora, second notice. Balance must clear by the 1st, or I start the paperwork. I like you girls, I do. But I can't run this on liking. D. The 1st was 11 days out. She put the phone down very gently, the way you set down something you'd like to throw, and made herself smile at her sister. "Finish your eggs," she said. "I'll walk you to the bus." The heron room at 4 in the afternoon was a different animal. House lights up. No gold. The river through the tall windows flat and bright with summer glare instead of evening copper. The cleaners had gone. The kitchen banged and hissed as the line came up for service. The lilies on the host stand had been swapped for fresh ones, and the whole front of the house smelled of cut stems and floor polish, and the sharp green of the basil Carlos was bruising somewhere back in the heat. Nora was halfway through marking her section when Vince found her, and he had the clipboard, and worse, he had a face she hadn't seen on him before. Not the oiled smile. Something underneath it, tight and pleased and a little afraid. "My office," he said. "Now, I'm setting 9 through 14. Vince, the 4:30. Birdie can set your section." His voice dropped. Now Belle, Birdie, at the service station, did not look up from her napkins, but her hands went still for 1/2 second, which from Birdie was a shout. The office was already hot, the day stacked up in it like cordwood, lemon cleaner and cardboard, and the low electric hum of the wine fridge through the wall. Vince shut the door and stood with his back to it, and he didn't sit, and he didn't tell her to. "Funny thing happened this morning," he said. "Frankly, the strangest call I've taken in 6 years." He set the clipboard down on the cluttered desk with great care. "A man from Hale Maritime. An assistant, very polite, very cold, wanted to confirm a reservation. For tonight. For Mr. Julian Hale. 8 o'clock, table 9, by the windows." He looked at her. "And he had one request." "One? Do you want to guess?" The heat in the closet seemed to climb 10 degrees. "Vince, his server." Vince's smile arrived now, and it was awful. "Mr. Hale would like the same server he had last night. By name. Nora Bell." He leaned a fraction closer, and she could smell the coffee and the breath mint failing under it. "So, the girl I put on probation last night for being too familiar with Mr. Julian Hale has been personally requested by Mr. Julian Hale. You see my problem. I don't know why he..." "Don't." The word came flat. "Frankly, I don't care what you did, or said, or did," and he leaned on the repeat just enough to make it filthy. To turn a zero tip into a personal request inside 12 hours. That's your business. But understand me, Belle. He picked the clipboard back up, and his knuckles were white on it. A man like Hale walks through this room once, and the room is worth more for a year. Reviews. Photographs they're not allowed to take, but take anyway. The owners hear his name, and they hear money. So tonight, you will be perfect. You will be silent and lovely, and you will give that man whatever he wants, and you will not, under any circumstances, embarrass this house. A beat. And whatever's happening here, whatever this is, it runs through me, not around me. Are we clear? There it was, under the fear, the agenda. Vince didn't want to fire her anymore. Vince wanted to own whatever she'd accidentally caught. She understood the shape of it, instantly and completely. The way you understand a current pulling at your knees. We're clear, she said. Good. He opened the door. The kitchen noise rushed in, the clatter and the heat, and somebody calling for a runner. Wear the clean apron, not the one with the burn on the pocket. And Belle, he caught her arm as she passed. Just for a second, his fingers cool and certain. Whatever he offered you. Whatever it is. The smile didn't move. I'd find that out before I trusted it. Men like that don't tip waitresses, they acquire them. He let go. She walked out into the bright, loud kitchen, with her face arranged into nothing, and she did not give him the satisfaction of rubbing her arm where his hand had been, though it took everything she had. Birdie cornered her at the linen shelf 20 minutes later, ostensibly to hand her a stack of warm napkins straight from the dryer, fragrant and hot in her arms. So, Birdie said, low, folding a corner that didn't need folding. The ghost made a reservation. You heard. Honey, the whole line heard. Carlos has already named the trout after you. She pressed a napkin flat. Tonight's special is the Nora. Comes plain and right, apparently, a pause. And then, gentler the wryness gone out of her voice. You sleep on that thing in your pocket like I told you? Nora's throat went tight. I texted him. Birdie's hand stopped. And he answered. And it made sense, Birdie. That's the problem. It all made sense. About Vince. About the zero. He knew Vince like he'd known him for years. And he'd known him for 40 minutes. That's not him being kind. Birdie's eyes were very steady, the laundromat warmth of the napkins between them. That's him being good at reading people who don't have the luxury of being read wrong. Don't mistake the second for the first. I've buried 2 friends who mistook the second for the first. She caught herself, softened it. Buried in debt, I mean. Buried in trouble they didn't pick. She squeezed Nora's wrist once, dry and warm. He looks at you like you're the first interesting thing in a long grey hall, fine, but you are not furniture in his hall, Swan. You've got a whole house of your own, even if the rent's behind. She let go. Now go put on the apron without the burn before Vince has a stroke. And Nora. Her mouth twitched back toward dry. If he leaves another zero tonight, fold him into a swan and float him down the river. I'll testify it was an accident. It was the wry line of the night, and it landed exactly where Birdie always landed it, in the half-second before the door opens, and Nora laughed despite everything, a small startled sound, and felt 1 degree more able to stand up straight. Then the doors opened for service, and the long summer evening began to gild the windows, and the river outside went slowly from glare to brass, and at 8 o'clock exactly, the charcoal coat came through the door. He looked worse than the night before, which she hadn't thought possible. Better dressed, a different summer weight suit, no tie, the collar open at the throat, but worse. The grey eyes more tired, a hollow under them that sleep hadn't touched. He let the host lead him to table 9, and he sat with his back to the room and his face to the river, the way he had before, and Nora watched Vince hover 3 steps off with a napkin he kept folding and unfolding. And she understood she'd be performing this whole thing in front of an audience of one very interested manager. She brought the water. She set it down. Her hands did not shake. which she counted as a personal triumph. "Good evening, Mr. Hale. Cool, correct, nothing free on the menu tonight." He looked up at her, and something in his face shifted. Disappointment, quick and quickly hidden, like a man who'd reached for a light switch and found the wall. "You're angry," he said. Low, so it didn't carry to Vince. "That's fair. I'm your server, sir. Can I start you with something while you look at the menu?" Nora, just her name, quiet, and the use of it was almost too much, intimate in a way the crowded gold room had no right to hold. "I asked for you tonight because I owe you a real conversation, and I couldn't think of anywhere else I'm allowed to have one. I don't get to just go places. There's always someone." His eyes flicked, the smallest motion, to Vince and back. "Someone watching to see what it's worth." "He thinks you're going to make me," she said, before she could stop herself, keeping her face pleasant, her voice flat and bright as a recited special. "My manager. He thinks you're acquiring me." His word. "He told me to find out what you offered before I trusted it." She set down the bread plate with a small, precise click. "So I'll ask you the same thing I asked at midnight, and you can answer it plainly this time. What do you actually want, Mr. Hale? Because I have a sister and a deposit due Friday and 11 days before I lose the roof we're under, and I do not have room in my life for a rich man's interesting evening." It came out lower and harder than she'd meant, and for one bad second she thought she'd done it, earned the second note in her file in front of the man himself. But Julian Hale didn't recoil. He went very still, the way he'd gone still over the bill last night, and he set down the menu he hadn't read, and he looked at her with something that wasn't pity, which was the only reason she didn't walk away. 11 days, he repeated, quietly. 11 days. "And if I gave you the deposit right now—" He started, and she felt the whole thing curdle, felt the shape of every story Birdie had ever warned her about rising up, and her face must have shown it, because he stopped himself, fast, and held up one hand. "No, I hear it. I'm sorry. That's the only language I've spoken for so long that I forget there are others." He pressed his thumb against the worn signet ring, turning it once. "Let me try again. What I want," he said, "is to eat dinner in a room where one person talks to me like I'm a person, and not a balance sheet. That's all. That's the whole of it. Last night you did that, without knowing who I was, and it was the first hour I've—" He stopped. The ring turned. "I'll tip you correctly tonight. On the line, where it counts. Whatever it costs me with your manager, I'll handle. I'm not testing you anymore. I'm just asking if you'll let me sit at your table and be talked to." Across the room, Vince's napkin had gone still. Nora stood with the bread basket warm against her forearm, the river going to brass behind his head, the whole gold room murmuring and clinking around them, and she did not know, genuinely, for the first time all day, did not know, whether she was looking at the loneliest honest man she'd ever served, or the most graceful trap that had ever been laid for a woman with a deposit due Friday. "The trout," she said finally, "is plain and right tonight. Carlos named it after me." The thing happened in his face that she'd waited for last night and not gotten. Not quite a smile, but the start of one, surfacing slow, like something coming up from deep water. "Then I'd be a fool to order anything else," Julian Hale said. "I'll have the Nora." And she had to turn away fast and write it down so that neither he nor Vince would see what her own face was doing. She made it through the seared scallops at table 11, and the wine at 14, and a child spilled lemonade at 12 before it happened. And when it happened the way these things always do, sideways, while she was carrying something hot. She came around the service station with a tray of warm plates and nearly walked into a woman she'd never seen, who stood just inside the host, stand in a way that said the room belonged to her, and she was deciding whether to keep it. Tall, 40, maybe, in cream silk that cost a season of Nora's wages, dark hair pulled back hard, a face that was beautiful the way a closed door is beautiful. She was looking at table 9. She was looking at the back of Julian Hale's charcoal shoulders, and her expression was doing something cold and precise and entirely private. "Can I help you?" Nora said, balancing the tray. The woman's eyes came to her, traveled the apron, the ponytail, the tired set of her mouth, and filed all of it in under a second. "You're the server. Not a question." "Belle? Was it?" The skin on Nora's arms prickled. "Do I know you?" "No," the woman said, and smiled, and the smile was worse than Vince's because it was genuine and it had teeth. "But I know him. I've known him a very long time. I'm the person who keeps Mr. Hale's life from becoming a story." She drew a card from a small cream clutch and held it out between two fingers, and Nora, hands full, had to set the tray on the station to take it. The card said only a name, Diana Vance, and a number, embossed, no title. "He's not well," Diana said, gently, as if confiding. "You won't have seen it. In one evening. 2 evenings, he's charming when he wants to be found. But he's been unwell since his father stepped back, and people who get close to him during these episodes, they tend to end up in the papers, or in a settlement, or simply gone. I clean it up. It's an unpleasant job, and I'm very good at it." She glanced again at the charcoal shoulders, and for one flickering instant something crossed her face that wasn't strategy at all. Something older, and sadder, and quickly shut away. "Whatever he's offered you, or written you, or made you feel, and I imagine he's made you feel rather seen. He's wonderful at that. You should know it isn't real. It's a man reaching for a railing in the dark. Don't mistake being the railing for being chosen. It was, almost word for word, Birdie's warning, dressed in cream silk and money, and that was what frightened Nora most. That the woman who cleaned up after Julian Hale and the woman who folded napkins beside her had arrived at the very same sentence from opposite ends of the earth. "He asked for the trout," Nora said, because it was all she had, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "That's all that's happened. He asked for the trout, and I brought it. Of course." Diana Vance slid the clutch shut with a soft click. "I'm sure that's all. I only wanted you to have my number, in case the trout becomes complicated." She looked at the card, now in Nora's hand. "You'll want it, Miss Bell. Girls in your position always end up wanting it. I'd just rather you had it before, this time, instead of after." She turned to go, paused, added without turning around, almost kindly, "Your manager's been told I'm here, by the way. He'll be wondering why I'm talking to you and not to him. I'd think about what you say when he asks." And she was gone, out into the warm jasmine night, leaving Nora at the service station with a tray of cooling plates, a cream card embossed with a stranger's number, and Vince already crossing the floor toward her with his face gone tight and white and furious, the second number of the night burning a hole in her hand exactly where the first one still burned in her apron pocket. "Belle," Vince said, low and shaking. "Who was that woman, and what did she give you?" Behind him, at table 9, Julian Hale had turned at last from the river, and was watching the three of them, Nora, the manager. The empty doorway, where the cream silk had vanished, with a stillness that had gone all the way through him. The start of his almost smile nowhere now, replaced by something that looked, across the whole gold length of the loud and glittering room, a great deal like fear. "Belle," Vince's voice had lost its oil entirely. It came out thin, almost a whisper, and that was somehow worse than shouting. "I asked you a question. Who was that? And what is in your hand?" Nora closed her fingers over the cream card. Behind Vince, the dining room went on glittering, oblivious, forks against china, the pianist sliding into something in a minor key, the warm river light pooling brass on every white cloth. The plates she'd set on the station were going cold. Table 11 would notice in 90 seconds. She held on to that thought. The plates. The ordinary urgent arithmetic of the floor. Because it was the only solid thing in reach. "A guest," she said. She wanted to leave her number for Mr. Hale. She didn't want to interrupt his dinner. It was a good lie. It was a Waitress lie, the kind built from true parts, Guests left numbers for important men all the time, slipped them through the staff like contraband. Vince's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe it, and he couldn't disprove it. And she watched him weigh which was worse, pushing a girl who'd just been personally requested by the most valuable name in the room, or letting it go in front of that name's turned, watching shoulders. "Give it here then," he said, and held out his hand. "If it's for Hale, it goes to Hale through me. That's how it works. Through me. Of course." She put the card in his palm and felt the small relief of being rid of it war with the cold understanding that she'd just handed Vince a live wire and let him think it was a paperclip. Diana Vance. No title. A number, embossed. Let him chase it. Let him find out for himself who cleaned up after Julian Hale, and what it meant that she'd come tonight, in person, in cream silk, to warn off a waitress. Vince turned the card over. Read the name. Something moved across his face. Not recognition, but the animal sense of a man who'd smelled money, and now smelled something underneath it that money didn't like. "Vance," he murmured. He slid the card into his breast pocket, and his hand pressed flat over it the way a man presses a wound. "Pick up your plates, Belle. 11's waiting. We'll talk after service." He glanced once at table 9, recalibrated his whole face into the host's smile in the space of a breath, and was gone toward the bar, smoothing his lapel. Nora let herself breathe. The plates had skinned over. She scraped a smile onto her own face and carried them to 11, apologized for the kitchen, comped nothing, because she had no power to comp anything, and was forgiven by people too rich to count the minutes. Then she turned back toward table 9, because she had a trout to deliver, and a man watching her with fear in his eyes, and she did not yet know which of the night's 3 numbers, the pencil one in her pocket, the embossed one in Vince's pocket, the rent one on her phone, was going to be the one that took the roof down. She brought him the Nora herself, the plate warm through the cloth napkin folded over her palm, the trout plain and right under a scatter of bruised basil and a wedge of summer lemon. The river behind him had gone full brass now, the long light flattening across the water, and through the propped terrace doors the warm night came in smelling of jasmine and hot stone and the green breath of the river. She set the plate down. He did not look at it. Who was she? Not a question. The same flat stillness he'd shown the bill. "You tell me," Nora said quietly, refilling his water though it didn't need it, giving her hands a reason to be at his table. "She knew you. She said she keeps your life from becoming a story. She gave me her number and told me you were unwell, and that I shouldn't mistake being your railing for being chosen." She set the pitcher down. She said it kindly. That was the worst part. Across the table, the muscles along Julian Hale's jaw went tight. He turned the signet ring once, slow. "Cream silk," he said. "Dark hair. A clutch she opens like she's deciding whether you're worth the sound. You know her." "Diana." He said it the way you'd name an old injury that flares before rain. "Diana Vance. She's worked for my family since I was 19. She manages exposures, situations, people who get close enough to become a liability." He looked up, and the tired grey eyes had something raw in them now, something he wasn't bothering to hide, and it frightened her more than Vince's whisper or Diana's teeth. "If Diana came here tonight, in person, it means someone told her about last night, within a day. Which means someone in my own house is watching where I go and reporting it. I came here because no one watches table 9. A short breath. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I keep being wrong about you, and the cost keeps landing on you instead of me. Why would your own people send someone to warn off a waitress?" Nora kept her voice low, bright, a server discussing the wine. "I served you trout. Twice. That's not a story. That's a Tuesday. Because the timing is bad." He pressed his thumb hard against the ring. "My father stepped back last year, but he didn't let go. There's a vote coming. Control of the maritime arm, the part that's actually mine. The part I built, there are people who would prefer I be seen as a man who isn't well. A man making strange choices. Eating alone at restaurants with no reservation. Writing things on receipts. His mouth moved. Not a smile. A man infatuated with a girl who serves him fish would be very convenient for them. It would explain everything. It would make me a problem they have to manage, instead of a man they have to answer to. The floor seemed to tilt half a degree under Nora's clean shoes. She understood, suddenly and completely, that she had walked into the middle of a war she could not see the edges of, that the pencil number in her apron wasn't a lonely man's reach across a grey hall. Or not only that, but a move on a board where she was a piece worth nothing and everything at once. They tend to end up in the papers, or in a settlement, or simply gone. Diana hadn't been lying. Diana had been describing the weather. "So I'm a liability," Nora said. Her hands had gone cold around the empty pitcher. "To you, to your vote. That's what she came to clean up." "You're not a liability," Julian said, low and fierce, and for the first time his voice had heat in it. "You're a person. The problem is that in my world those two words mean the same thing, and I forgot, for one evening, that they would mean it about you too." He looked down at the plate, the trout going cold, the basil wilting in the warm air. "Eat your dinner in peace, the rest of the room thinks. I can't even give you that. I should go." "Don't." It was out before she'd decided it. He looked up. She didn't know why she'd said it. Every sensible voice she owned was screaming the opposite. Birdie's and Deanna's, and her own. Except that a man reaching for a railing in the dark was still, underneath everything, a man in the dark, and she had spent her whole life unable to walk past that. "Eat the trout," she said, gentler. "You ordered it. You'll insult Carlos. And if you leave now, Vince wins, and that woman wins, and you'll have come twice, and let them decide what it meant both times." She straightened the already straight fork. "Eat. I'll come back about the wine." For a long moment he just looked at her, the brass light on the water behind him, the warm night breathing jasmine through the doors. Then he picked up the fork. "Tell Carlos," he said quietly, "that the Nora is the best thing I've eaten in a year. He'll think I'm talking about the fish." It was almost a joke. It was the closest he'd come. And Nora turned away with her chest tight and aching, and did not see, 3 tables back, Vince standing very still by the bar, with a phone to his ear, and the cream card flat on the counter under his spread fingers, his lips moving, his eyes on her the whole time. She found out what the call had been at the end of service, when the floor had thinned to a last lingering two-top, and the river had gone from brass to black glass, and the lilies had opened their throats wide in the heat. Vince came across the empty room toward her, and he wasn't tight and white anymore. He was loose. He was smiling the full smile, the awful one, the one that meant he'd worked something out. "I made a call," he said, conversational, stopping close, "about our Miss Vance. Turns out she's not a guest at all. Turns out she's Hale's fixer. The one they send when something needs to disappear quietly." He tilted his head. "And here's the funny part, Belle. I called the number on her card to ask, very politely, whether the house could be of any assistance. Professional courtesy, and she was delighted to hear from me." His smile widened. "She'd like us to keep an eye on you. On the two of you. She'd like to know what he says to you, what he writes, what he leaves. And she's prepared to be generous about it. Very generous. To the house. To me. A beat. To you, even, if you're smart." Nora's stomach turned over slowly, the way the river turned, dark and deep and without a sound. "You want me to spy on him? I want you to keep doing exactly what you're doing," Vince said, "and tell me about it after. That's all. A man like Hale is a gift to this room either way. Either he keeps coming and we're the place he comes, or he becomes a problem, and the people managing the problem pay us to help. We win in both directions. Frankly, I've never had a guest this useful." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair back, almost tender, and she went rigid and did not pull away because pulling away cost more than holding still. "You've stumbled into something good here, Nora. For once in your life, don't be too proud to take it. 11 days, isn't it, on the apartment?" His smile didn't move. Funny how I remember the things you tell people when you think no one's listening. The closet of the office, the lemon cleaner, the second note in her file. She'd thought that was the worst of him. This was worse. This was Vince with leverage. Vince who'd been handed a wire and turned out to know exactly what it was after all. Vince who'd taken her rent number and her sister's deposit and Diana Vance's money and braided them into a leash. "And if I don't," she said, "then I'd hate to find that the till was short on a probationary server's night," Vince said pleasantly. "I'd hate to have to file the second note. I'd hate for the reference, when you went looking for the next job, to be honest about why you left." He stepped back, satisfied, smoothing his lapel. "But you won't make me do any of that. You're a smart girl with a sister and a deadline. Go home. Sleep on it. We'll talk Friday." He paused. "Which is, I believe, the day your deposit's due." Funny how that worked out. He walked away whistling, low, the gold sign going dark behind him, and Nora stood alone in the white work light, with both numbers gone from her hands now and a third leash closing around her throat, and understood that the trap Diana had warned her about had been real all along. Only it hadn't been Julian's. It had been built around her by everyone who'd noticed she was standing too close to money, and she had walked into the center of it carrying warm plates and trying to do her job. She didn't take the bus. She walked the whole long way through the warm jasmine dark because she couldn't bear to sit still inside the machine of her own thoughts. The streets gave off the day's heat in slow waves. A bar on the corner spilled music and yellow light and the smell of citrus and ice. Somewhere a sprinkler ticked across a lawn she'd never own. She walked and she did the arithmetic that never stopped. 40 for the deposit. The balance for the first 11 days. The till Vince could short. The reference he could poison. The money Diana was delighted to be generous with. And somewhere around the second mile, the arithmetic arrived at the only place arithmetic ever arrived for women like her, which was that the smart thing and the right thing were not the same thing, and never had been, and she was going to have to choose. And soon. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She almost didn't look. She was so certain it was Vince, or the landlord, or some new number with new teeth, that the actual name on the screen took a second to land. Julian Hale. "I owe you the truth about tonight," the message read. "Not at your table, where you have to perform for the room and for him. Somewhere you can throw something at me if you want to. There's a place by the water under the old grain pier, coffee cart, runs late. No one I know would be caught dead near it. I'll be there an hour. You owe me nothing, but I'd rather you hear it from me than from Diana, or from your manager, or from whatever version of me they're already selling you." Nora stopped on the warm sidewalk under a street lamp gauzy with moths. Down the block the laundromat glowed, 3 flights below her sleeping sister and the fold-out and the box fan turning its patient head. She thought about Birdie. "You are not furniture in his hall, Swan," she thought about Diana. "Don't mistake being the railing for being chosen." She thought about Vince's fingers in her hair, and the word generous, and the way he'd said acquire like it was a kind of love that came with benefits. And she thought, traitorously, about the start of a smile coming up through grey water, and a man saying I'll have the Nora like it cost him something to be that human in a crowded room. She typed, "Give me 20 minutes. Then she went up the 3 flights, checked that Posey was breathing slow under the fan, left a note that said back soon, locked up, love you under the lamp, took her keys, and went back out into the summer night toward the water, knowing with total clarity that she was doing the dangerous thing, the thing every tired woman she'd ever worked beside would beg her not to do, and unable, the way she'd never once in her life been able, to walk past a man in the dark. The grain pier had stopped being a working pier before Nora was born. Now it was a long black finger of rotting timber and rusted bollards reaching out into the river, and at the foot of it, improbably, a coffee cart strung with bare bulbs threw a small warm island of light onto the planks. The air smelled of creosote and river mud and roasting beans, and, under it all, the wide green cold breath of the water moving in the dark. A radio in the cart played something old and low. The man working it had the unbothered face of someone who'd served every kind of person at every kind of hour and judged none of them. Julian Hale was sitting on a bollard at the edge of the light, with 2 paper cups beside him, his charcoal jacket gone, his sleeves pushed up, looking, for the first time since she'd laid eyes on him, like he belonged somewhere, not at the best table by the windows. Here, at the broken end of things, with the city's gold towers stacked across the black water behind him and his own among them. "You came," he said, and stood, and there was something undefended in it. "I came to throw something," she said. "You promised I could throw something. There's gravel by the bollard." A pause. "I bought you a coffee in case you missed." It startled the laugh out of her, small and unwilling, the second time he'd done that. She took the cup instead of the gravel. It was warm through the paper, and the steam came up smelling of scorched sugar, and she wrapped both hands around it and did not sit. "Talk," she said. "The truth. All of it. I've had 2 warnings tonight, and a leash put on me by my own manager, so the bar for true is on the floor, and I'll know if you reach under it." So he told her. He sat back down on the bollard and looked out at the moving water and told her, in the low, careful voice of a man who had not said most of these sentences aloud before. His father, who had built the company and never built anything else. Never a marriage that held. Never a son he looked at without measuring. The maritime arm Julian had wrestled out of the wreck of a bad decade and made the only profitable thing the family had left. The vote, 3 weeks out, where a coalition of the board and his father's old loyalists would decide whether Julian was sound enough to keep it, or whether it would be folded back under the people who'd nearly run it into the riverbed. Diana, who had cleaned up after the Hales for 2 decades, and whose loyalty had quietly migrated, over the last year, from the family to the faction. He'd watched it happen and said nothing, because Diana had also been, for a while, when he was very young and very alone, something close to the only person who'd ever sat with him in the dark. "That's the part that undoes me," he said, watching the water. "She's not wrong that I'm not well. I haven't slept right in a year. I eat alone, because rooms full of people who want something cost more than I have left to spend. She knows that better than anyone, because she's one of the only people who ever watched me when I wasn't performing. And now she's using it. Everything she said to you tonight was true, and was also a weapon. Both, at once. That's how the people in my life love me." He turned the ring. "When I sat down at your table last night, I wasn't reaching for a railing. I want you to believe that even though it's exactly what a man reaching for a railing would say, I sat down because you looked at me like I was a nuisance and a person at the same time, and I hadn't been a nuisance to anyone in years. Do you know how lonely it is to never once be in someone's way?" Nora stood at the edge of the warm bulb light with the coffee going from hot to warm in her hands and the river breathing cold against her ankles, and she believed him. That was the trouble. Every word had the texture of true, and Diana's words had had it too, and she no longer trusted her own ability to tell the difference, because the whole night had been built to break exactly that ability in exactly her. "Vince wants me to spy on you," she said. It came out flat into the dark. "Diana's paying the house to watch you through me. He took her money on the phone tonight while you ate the trout. He told me to keep doing what I'm doing and report it back, and if I don't, he shorts my till and files the note and poisons my reference. And I lose the floor, and then the apartment, and then—" She stopped. The river moved. "So whatever this is, whatever you came here to be honest about, you should know that the most honest thing in my life right now is that I cannot afford you. I have a sister who needs $40 by Friday, and a roof I'm 11 days from losing. And you are the most expensive thing that has ever sat at my table. And I don't mean the wine. The radio in the cart played on, low and warm. A barge moved somewhere far out on the black water, its lights sliding slow. Julian Hale was very still, the way he went still when something landed all the way through him. "Then let me make it simple," he said at last, and reached into his pocket, and Nora's whole body braced because she knew what a man like him reached into his pocket for, and she had sworn she would walk away the second he did it. But it wasn't a checkbook. It wasn't cash. It was a phone, and he turned it to face her, and on the screen was a banking app, and a transfer already filled in, ready, his thumb not yet down. "This is the thing I'm not supposed to do," he said quietly. "Diana would call it acquiring you. Your friend who folds the napkins would call it the railing. Your manager would call it proof of whatever he's already decided. And maybe they'd all be right. So I'm not going to press it. I want you to watch me not press it." He turned the phone back around and locked it and put it away, and the empty space where the gesture had been hung in the warm air between them. "I don't want to buy your Friday. I want to give you a way out that doesn't run through me at all. Because anything that runs through me, they'll use to prove I bought you. And then it'll be true no matter what either of us meant." He looked up at her. "There's a position. Not with me. With a foundation my mother left, before she went, a real one, river conservation. The thing your sister wants to study. It's run by people who've never heard my name without an eye roll. They need a coordinator. It pays. It's clean. I can't even give you the recommendation myself or it poisons it. But I can tell you the application closes Friday, and your name, if you sent it, would be read on its merits by people who owe me nothing." Nora stared at him across the small, warm island of light. The river breathed. The gold towers stacked themselves across the black water. And the trap she'd been so sure of, the simple, ancient trap, rich man and waitress, and a number in pencil, turned over in her hands and showed her a different shape underneath, a shape she had no map for. That might be a door, and might be a deeper trap dressed as a door. And she could not tell. She could not tell, and Friday was Friday, no matter which it was. "Why?" she said. Her voice wasn't steady now. "Why would you do that? Build me a way out that you don't get to be the hero of." "Men like you don't, because Diana was right about one thing." He stood. The bulbs swung a little in the river wind, sliding the light across his tired face. "People who get close to me end up in the papers, or in a settlement, or gone. Every one of them. For my whole life, and the only way I can think of to not do that to you is to give you something that's yours, that can't be taken back, that doesn't have my name on it. And then," his throat worked, "and then let you decide whether you ever want to see me again, from a place where you don't need to. That's the only clean thing I have left to offer a person. A way to not need me." He picked up his jacket. "The application's under the foundation's name, not mine. I won't text you about it. I won't come to the restaurant again. That's the one thing I can do that actually protects you from Vince and Diana both. After tonight, I'm a man who ate trout twice and lost interest. That's the story that keeps you safe. A breath. It's also the story that costs me the only table I've wanted to sit at in a year. I'm aware of the arithmetic. I do it too." And he set down his coffee, untouched, on the bollard beside hers. And he walked off down the warm, dark pier toward a waiting car she hadn't noticed. His shoulders the same charcoal line she'd watched all night. And Nora stood alone at the broken end of the river, with 2 cooling cups and a way out she couldn't tell from a trap, and the whole black water moving past her toward the sea. She was halfway home, walking fast through the jasmine dark, with her keys biting into her fist, when the phone buzzed again, and this time it was Vince, and the message turned the warm night to ice. "Saw you weren't on the late bus. Hope you slept on it like I said. One thing." Diana Vance called back. She'd like a name by Friday. Yours or someone else's. She wasn't fussy, but she'd like to know whose side the new girl's on before the vote. So would I. Friday. Bell. Deposit day. Choose well. And under it, a photograph. Grainy, long lens, taken from a car. The grain pier. The small island of bulb light. 2 figures at the broken end of it. Her and Julian Hale close. The phone turned between them. A moment that could be read 100 ways, and that Vince and Diana would read only one. Nora stood under the moth-gauzed street lamp, 3 doors from the laundromat. The warm night pressing close. Her sister asleep above the tumbling dryers. The river 2 blocks east, breathing its green cold breath through the dark, and understood that the choice was no longer 11 days out, or even due Friday. It was here. It was in her hand. Someone had been watching the pier. Someone always had been. And whatever she did next, send the application, take the leash, throw the phone in the river, run up the 3 flights and hold her sleeping sister, and pretend the gold towers across the water had never once looked her way. She was past the place where doing nothing was still one of the choices. The dryers rumbled their soft, endless thunder below. The phone glowed in her hand with Vince's photograph and Vince's deadline, and Julian's clean, impossible door. All of it due the same Friday. All of it hers to answer. She climbed the 3 flights into the warm cotton dark, and she did not yet know what she was going to do. But she knew, with the cold certainty of a woman who'd run out of stairs in the dark, that by Friday everyone who'd been watching her would have their answer, and that one of them was going to be wrong about which side she was on, and that she had until Friday to decide which one. The lamp was still on when she came in, and Posey hadn't moved. One arm flung off the fold-out. The library books slid to the floor, the box fan turning its patient head across them both. Nora stood in the doorway with the keys biting her palm and the phone hot in her other hand, and for a long moment she did not turn on another light. She just breathed the warm cotton and detergent dark and let the worst of it come. Because the worst of it was simple. Maybe Julian Hale really had arranged all of it. Maybe the pier and the locked phone and the clean, impossible door were the most expensive performance a lonely man had ever staged, and she was the audience and the prop at once. Maybe every tired woman who'd ever warned her had been right, and the only difference this time was that the trap had been built by someone patient enough to make it look like a rescue. She sat down at the counter with the stove light buzzing over her and let herself believe it all the way to the bottom, because she had learned long ago that the only way past a fear was straight through the middle of it. She believed it until it stopped having any new places to take her. And then, sitting in the warm dark with her sister breathing slow across the room and the dryers rumbling their soft thunder 3 floors down, she found the one thing the fear couldn't touch. He had turned the phone around and locked it. She had watched him not press it. A man building a trap presses the button. A man who wants you to owe him lets you watch the gift, then takes the credit. Julian Hale had done the opposite of both. He had built her a door with his own name scrubbed off it, and then walked down a rotting pier away from her so the story would read lost interest. That wasn't how you acquired a person. That was how you set one down gently and stepped back. Nora opened the phone, not to Vince's photograph, not to Diana's embossed number, which she'd handed away anyway. She opened the browser, and she typed the name of a foundation she'd never heard of until 2 hours ago, the one her sister had been talking about since May. River Ecology, the clean green thing. And there it was, plain and real, a coordinator position. Applications closing Friday at 5. No Hale anywhere on the page, just a small organization with a tired website and a mission and a form. She started filling it out at 1 in the morning, with the stove light buzzing and the warm river coming faint through the open window, and she did not stop until it was done. She didn't sleep much. She walked Posey to the summer program bus at 8, the morning already white and hot, the sidewalk giving back yesterday's warmth through her shoes, and she did not say a word about any of it, Because a 15-year-old did not need to carry a grown woman's Friday. "You did the thing with your shoulders all night," Posey said at the curb, squinting up at her. "I heard you not sleeping." "I was thinking. About money, about the river," Nora said. And it was almost true, and her sister gave her a look their mother used to give, then climbed onto the bus and pressed her palm flat to the window, and Nora pressed hers up to meet it through the warm glass before the bus pulled away into the bright. She had 2 days. She knew, walking back through the jasmine heat past the laundromat's open door and its gust of detergent and steam, exactly what Friday was going to ask of her, because Vince had told her in plain words. A name by Friday, yours or someone else's. He wanted her to choose a side in a war over a company she'd never set foot in, and the side he wanted her on paid. And the side she was drifting toward had nothing to offer but a door with no name on it, and a man who'd promised never to come to her table again. The smart thing was still the smart thing. She turned it over the whole walk, the way she turned the slip, the way her tongue found the sore tooth. Give Vince a name. Give Diana her quiet little report. Take the generous money, clear the rent, pay the deposit, keep the floor. Nobody would ever know. Julian Hale would go back to eating alone in rooms full of air, and the vote would go however votes went among people who owned gold towers, and Nora Bell would still have a roof. She got all the way to the foot of her own stairs before she understood that she'd already decided, days ago, the moment she'd smoothed the slip flat instead of crumpling it. Friday came hot and bright and wrong from the first hour. The Heron Room at 4 in the afternoon smelled of cut lily stems and floor polish and the green of the basil Carlos bruised in the back, and Vince was waiting by the host stand in a suit too good for a Friday. And that was the first sign that the day was not going to be a day she survived quietly. "Big night," he said, falling into step beside her as she crossed to the service station. "Private rooms booked. The Hale board does its dinners here twice a year. Did you know that? Of course you didn't. They're in the Cormorant room at 8. Closed doors. Mr. Julian Hale's father. Several very important men who decide things." He smiled the full smile. "And Miss Diana Vance, who asked specifically that you work the floor tonight. Isn't that something? After everything, she wants the new girl close." He let it sit. "She'll want her name Bell. I'll want mine. You've had till Friday." "It's Friday." Nora tied the clean apron, the one without the burn, and kept her hands steady, because steady hands were the only dignity the floor ever let you keep. "I'm here to carry plates, Vince. You're here to do exactly what I tell you. The oil thinned. I shorted nothing yet. I filed nothing yet. That's a gift, and gifts expire." He stepped back, recovered the host's smile as a man at the door arrived, and was gone, smoothing his lapel, and Nora stood with the warm lily scent thick in her throat, and understood that the room she'd worked for 2 years had finished turning into a thing with teeth. Birdie found her at the linen shelf, pressing a stack of drier, warm napkins into her arms, fragrant and hot, and her face was not wry at all. "The whole board's in the Cormorant tonight," Birdie said low. "I've worked 30 years of these. I know what they smell like. They smell like men about to take something from a younger man and call it concern." She held Nora's eyes. "And the fixer wants you on the floor. You know what that is? That's a woman who wants a witness she can point at. You walk in there carrying water, and whatever happens in that room, she's got a waitress to hang it on. Look, he's even bringing the help into it." She pressed a napkin flat with the heel of her hand. "I'd call in sick, Swan, except sick is the second note in your file and you can't afford the file." Her mouth tried for dry and didn't make it. "If I were 40 years younger and 40 pounds braver, I'd fold the whole board into swans and float the lot of them past the grain pier. I'm only one of those things now." It was the wry line of the night, and it landed in the half-second before the doors opened, the way Birdie always landed it, and Nora loved her so much in that moment her eyes stung. "I'm not calling in sick," Nora said. "No," Birdie said. "You wouldn't be you if you did. Just," she squeezed Nora's wrist, dry and warm, "keep your house your own in there. Whatever they offer, whatever they threaten, you've got a whole house of your own. She saw Diana before the board arrived, and she saw her alone, and that was the thing that undid the simple story Nora had been telling herself for 2 days. The cormorant room had a service alcove off the back, a narrow slot of stainless steel and stacked glassware where the staff staged the wine, and the door to it stood half open onto the private room while the table was being set. Nora went in to fill the water carafes, and through the gap she saw Diana Vance standing alone at the tall window. No clutch, no cream silk armor of strategy on her face. Just a woman with her back to an empty room, looking at the river going to Brass, holding something small in both hands. A photograph. Old, by the way the color had gone. Diana's thumb moved across the surface of it slowly, back and forth, the way you'd smooth a thing that couldn't be smoothed anymore, and her shoulders had come down out of their hard line, and her mouth, unwatched, was not the mouth that had smiled with teeth at the host stand. It was younger than that, and softer, and full of something she would never once have let a waitress see on purpose. Nora went still with the carafe cold and sweating in her hands. The radio behind the cart, the warm river, the gold light, none of it reached the alcove. There was only the half-open door, and the woman at the window and the photograph, and Nora understood, the way you understand weather coming, that whoever was in that picture had once made Diana Vance into a person who could stand still and grieve, and that the hard cream silk woman who cleaned up after the Hales was the thing she'd built afterward. On top of it, to keep from standing at windows like this. Nora did not go in. She set the carafe down very quietly and stepped back out of the alcove and let the door be, because some things you weren't meant to walk into, even when you'd been handed the cover to. She filled the carafes from the other station, but she carried the photograph with her now, the way she carried the slip, and she could not make the simple story fit anymore. The one where the fixer was only teeth. The board came at 8. 6 men, and Julian's father at the head of them, a tall old man with Julian's grey eyes gone flat and certain. A man who shook no hands and looked at the room the way you'd look at an asset before you sold it. Julian came last, in charcoal, his face arranged into nothing, and he did not look at Nora once as he passed her in the corridor, and she understood that the not looking was the whole of what he could give her in front of these people, and that it cost him. The doors closed. Nora worked the floor outside, the regular dining room glittering and loud and oblivious, and twice she carried wine into the cormorant room through air, so cold and quiet you could have cut it. The first time, Julian's father was talking, low, about stability, and the perception of stability, and what the partners need to see. The second time, it was Diana, standing, a folder open in her hand, saying in a smooth, even voice that Julian had been behaving erratically, eating alone, no security, forming attachments below his station, and that she had documented it in the interest of the family. And on the table, fanned where everyone could see, was the photograph from the pier, her and Julian. The bulb light. The phone turned between them. Nora set the wine down with hands that did not shake, and she looked at Julian. And Julian was looking at the photograph of the two of them on a public board table, with his whole future being weighed against it, and his face had gone to the stillness she'd first seen over a 0 on a tip line. The stillness of a man absorbing a blow, without giving the room the satisfaction of the flinch. This, Julian's father said, tapping the photograph with one finger, is what we cannot have. Not because of the girl, because of the judgment. A man who runs to a pier at midnight to confide in a waitress is a man who has stopped protecting the enterprise. He did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. Step aside from the maritime arm tonight, voluntarily, and we keep it quiet. Family handles family. Or don't, and Diana's documentation becomes the board's business, and then it becomes everyone's. Nora straightened the carafe that didn't need straightening, the way she did at every table, and she should have turned and walked out, because the floor was not her war, and the smart thing and the right thing had finally and completely stopped being the same thing. She set the wine bottle down in its coaster. She did not leave. That's not what happened at the pier, she said. The room turned. 7 powerful men and a fixer in cream silk, all of them looking at the waitress who had just spoken in a room where the waitress was furniture. Julian's head came up. Across the table, Diana's face did something fast and complicated, and Vince, who had slipped in behind Nora to refill nothing, to watch, to collect his name, went white at the wall. "Miss Bell," Diana said, gently, dangerously, "this doesn't concern you." "It's got my face on the table," Nora said. Her heart was going like the dryers, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. "So it concerns me a little." She looked at the old man at the head, at the grey eyes that were Julian's eyes with all the warmth burned out of them. "You want to know what your son did at that pier? He showed me a phone with money on it, already typed in, enough to fix every problem I have. And he locked it and put it away and made me watch him not send it. Because if he'd sent it, someone like her," she did not look at Diana, "could call it buying me. He built me a way out of my own troubles with his name scrubbed all the way off it, so that it could never be used against either of us. That's the erratic behavior. That's the man who stopped protecting the enterprise." She picked up the empty bottle off the table. "Where I'm from, we don't call that unwell. We call it the only decent thing a rich man's ever done in front of me." The silence had weight. Somewhere out in the bright dining room, the pianist slid into something minor, and the warm jasmine night breathed through the propped terrace doors, and none of it reached the cold air of the cormorant room. "And who," the old man said, very quietly, "do you imagine you are, to tell this table what its son is?" "Nobody," Nora said. "I carry the water. But you asked the room to see a man who'd lost his judgment. And I'm the room, and that's not what I saw." She turned to go, because she'd said it, and saying it was the only thing she'd come with. And that was when Julian stood up. "She's right," Julian said. "And I'll save the board the trouble of a vote." He came around the table, past his father, past the fanned photograph, and he stood in the cold, quiet room in his charcoal suit, and he looked at the men who'd been deciding whether he was sound, and his voice was low and even and did not reach for anything. "You want the maritime arm to look stable," he said. "Fine, I'll make it stable. I'm signing my personal control of it into the Foundation Trust, my mother's foundation, the river one, the thing none of you ever thought was worth a board seat. Effective tonight. It comes off my name and out of this family's reach, and it runs under people who answer to a charter, not to a vote." He let that land. "You can't use my judgment against me if I no longer hold the thing my judgment governs, and you can't quiet me with documentation about a waitress if I've already told the whole table the truth myself. I went to that pier because she's the first person in a year who looked at me like I was a nuisance and a man at the same time. That's not an attachment below my station. That's the only thing that's kept me standing." His father's face had gone grey and still. "You'd give it away, the thing you built. Over nothing," Julian said. "Over my own name being clean enough to deserve a person like her, which it hasn't been in a very long time, and which it won't be as long as I'm holding power. You can hang over me." He turned the signet ring once, slow, and then Nora watched it. He worked it off his smallest finger, the worn old ring, and set it on the board table beside the photograph. "That's grandfather's. The family's. I don't want to wear what comes with it anymore. Sell the arm back to your loyalists, father. I'll coordinate river cleanups and answer to a charter and sleep through the night for the first time since you stepped back, and you can tell the partners whatever stable story you need." He looked, finally, at Nora, openly, in front of all of them, and the start of the smile she'd been waiting for 2 nights came all the way up from the deep water at last. "I left a 0 in front of the whole room once, because I was a man who'd forgotten there was any other way to be seen. I'm not leaving 0s anymore. It cost him the company. It cost him the ring. It cost him the only inheritance the old man had ever measured him by, and he laid all of it down on the table in front of the people who'd come to take it, and that was when Nora understood the difference. Finally, between a man reaching for a railing and a man building a door. The railing man takes. The doorman gives the thing away and steps back and lets you choose from a place where you don't need him. "Your sound," she heard herself say, into the silence. "For what it's worth from the help. You're the soundest man in this room." It was Diana who broke first, and not the way any of them expected. The old man was still staring at the ring on the table, and Vince had melted halfway out the door already, recalculating which side paid now, when Diana Vance closed her folder. She looked at the photograph of Nora and Julian at the pier. She looked at the ring. And something went out of her shoulders, the same thing Nora had seen go out of them at the window, and she did not put the hard cream silk woman back on. "Don't sell it back to them, Robert," she said to the old man. "Quiet, even. I've watched these men run the arm before. They'll have it on the riverbed inside 2 years. And you know it, and so do I. And I've spent 20 years cleaning up after the people you trust instead of the son you don't." She set the folder down on the table and slid it across the cold wood toward Julian, past the ring, until it stopped where he could reach it. "It's all in there. Every instruction they gave me about you this year. Who paid for the long lens at the pier. What the vote was really for. I documented all of it. I'm very good at documentation." Her voice did not break, but it bent. "I told you once, when you were 19 and alone in this same building, that I'd keep your life from becoming a story. I meant it then. Somewhere I started keeping it from becoming yours instead of theirs, and I told myself that was the same job." She glanced at the river going to black glass in the window. "It wasn't. I'm sorry, Julian. That's 20 years late, and worth exactly what late apologies are worth, which is nothing, but it's true, and it's mine." Julian picked up the folder. He read one line, the first one, his jaw tight, and then he closed it and looked at the woman who'd sat with him in the dark when he was a boy, and then learned to weaponize the dark. And he didn't forgive her, not in words, because some things don't get said across a board table. He just nodded once. Slow, and that was enough. "Go home, Diana," he said. "Take the night off. For the first time in 20 years, there's nothing to clean up." She gathered her clutch. At the door she paused beside Nora, close, and for a moment Nora braced for the teeth. "They didn't come. You kept your house your own," Diana said, very low, just for her. "I never managed it. Don't let them buy the deed off you slow, the way they did me." And she was gone into the warm jasmine dark, cream silk, and a straight back. And Nora understood she'd just watched a woman set down a thing she'd carried for 2 decades, and that the photograph at the window had been the weight under all of it the whole time. Vince caught her by the service station after, white-lipped and grasping, the leash gone slack in his hands, and his whole face scrambling for the new arrangement of power. "Belle, Nora, listen. Whatever I said about the till, the note, none of that, obviously, we're past." He smoothed his lapel, that old tell, the gesture of a man feeling for solid ground. "A man like Hale, and you close to him, that's good for the house. I always said you'd stumbled into something good. I was protecting you. You called Diana Vance and offered to sell me," Nora said, on the phone, while he ate the trout. Vince's mouth worked. "Frankly, don't," she said, and it came out almost gentle, because she had no more fear of him left to spend. "I quit, Vince. As of now. You can keep the second note. File it. I've got a foundation to call in the morning." She untied the clean apron, the one without the burn, and folded it once and set it on the service station beside a stack of Birdie's drier, warm napkins. "Tell Carlos the Nora's off the menu. I'm taking the name with me." Birdie, 2 steps away, did not look up from her napkins, but her hands had gone still, and she was smiling all the way down to her silver roots. "There she is," Birdie said. "To no one. To the linen. Swan's got her wings on. The foundation called on Monday." They'd read her application Friday at 4:40, 20 minutes before it closed, And they'd liked the part where she described the river as the best thing on the menu and free besides, and they offered her the coordinator job on the spot for money that wasn't a fortune, but was steady, was clean, was hers, and ran through no one's name but her own. The rent cleared on the 1st. Posey got her $40 for the river ecology trip and came home sunburned and talking so fast about caddisfly larvae that Nora had to make her stop and eat. Julian Hale did not come to the apartment with a checkbook, and he did not text her about the foundation, and he kept, for 3 whole weeks, the promise he'd made on the pier, to be, on paper, a man who'd lost interest, so that no story could be built around either of them. He came on a Saturday instead, to the grain pier, because that was the one place no one they knew would be caught dead near, and because the coffee cart ran late and the man working it judged no one. Nora was already there when he arrived, sitting on the bollard at the broken end of the light with 2 paper cups beside her, the river breathing wide and green and cold in the warm dark, the gold towers stacked across the black water, with one fewer of them his. "You came," she said, and stood. "You bought the coffee," he said. "There was something undefended in it, in case you missed." She handed him a cup, warm through the paper, the steam coming up scorched sweet. "I hear you're unemployed now." "River cleanups don't pay like maritime arms. They pay in sleep," he said. "I've slept 11 nights in a row. I'd forgotten what my own ceiling looked like." The start of the smile came up easy now, no deep water to climb through anymore. "And I hear my new coordinator is something of a tyrant about deposit deadlines." "Your coordinator doesn't work for you," Nora said. "Your coordinator works for a charter. You answer to her, actually. Funny how that worked out. I'm aware of the arithmetic." He looked at her over the cup, the bulbs swinging a little in the river wind, sliding the warm light across a face that wasn't tired, in the way sleep couldn't fix anymore. "Order something," he said, "from the cart. I want to hear you do the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you tell me what's plain and right." She laughed, the small unwilling sound he kept startling out of her, and turned to the cart, and ordered him the worst coffee on the river, plain and black, and called it, with a perfectly straight face, the Julian. Comes bitter and honest. No one's ever named anything after it, and it's the best thing at this table. And Julian Hale, who had left a 0 in front of a whole gold room and hidden the truth in pencil, where only the person who cleaned up after him would ever find it, set down his cup on the bollard and looked at the woman who had smoothed the slip flat instead of crumpling it, and said the only direct thing he had let himself say in 2 years. Low, under the radio and the wide green river and the warm summer dark. "I'd be a fool," he said, "to order anything else." She didn't throw the gravel. She sat down beside him on the broken end of the pier, where the city's gold lights couldn't quite reach, and she let her shoulder rest against his charcoal sleeve. And the river moved past them, both toward the sea, carrying the warm night and the jasmine and the green cold breath of the water. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them was a person reaching for a railing in the dark. They were just 2 people at a table no one else had wanted, with the best thing on the menu in front of them. And it was free. And it had always been free. And it had only ever been waiting for someone to notice. If this story warmed you, if you believed in Nora's stubborn heart and Julian's slow climb up out of the dark, stay a while at our table. Subscribe, and let me know which moment you'll remember. The 0, the pier, or the night the waitress kept her house her own. And come back soon. Because there's always another story waiting, where dignity matters more than money, and the kindest people turn out to be the richest of all.